Hi, I'm Alec, and I am the founder of Trakke. Today, I'm going to be chatting to Dan Rubin. Dan is a designer, a photographer, and a creative director. And over the last 12 months, he's been traveling all over the UK, meeting our customers to tell their stories and find out a little bit more about how track bags fit into their daily lives. It's all part of our Customer Stories project. And I'm joined today by Dan, who's going to give us a bit more information from behind the scenes. So, welcome, Dan. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Alex. It's good to get to chat this way. How you doing?
Really well, thanks. Yeah, how are you?
Doing okay. Doing okay.
Good. It's been a while since this project kicked off, so you must be on to new things.
Oh well, always. Trying to keep momentum going on dozens of things sometimes, but it keeps me challenged in a good way.
So I know I've just introduced you a little bit, but I know that you do a lot of different types of work in a lot of different types of industries. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you do and tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure. Well, so my background is design, and design is a broad term in itself. But I started out as a graphic designer doing a lot of print work a long time ago, 30 years ago, when I was in my teens. And from there, I was very lucky to kind of just be around and playing with things at the time that the web was really coming into its own. And I ended up learning how to code and design for the web before many people were doing both of those together, before there was even a term web designer. So I really kind of launched my career as a designer because of tech and the web in those early days. So I was doing a mixture of brand and digital product design for a good number of years, like almost 20 years, running a small agency with my brother near Miami. And that was like the first big chunk of my creative career. And photography has now been a professional aspect of my life for over 10 years. But it started as a hobby 5 or 6 years before that, as a way to just get out from behind the screen. So, one way or another, I've always been doing things that are creative in nature, and whether it's design, creative direction, product design, photography, getting into filmmaking and directing now, and also music, which is a completely different tangent we could go on. But yeah, I basically try as hard as I can to live a creative life, both professionally and in all other ways.
Amazing. It's so varied, everything that you do. Um, it's actually been a while since we started this project.
Mm.
Tell us a little bit about how it all came about.
Well, the nice thing about just the way life works sometimes is that when you meet really creative, interesting people and you get to know them, you end up meeting other interesting, creative people through them. And that's how I came to discover Track and get introduced to you in the first place through our mutual friend, Mark Shaler, who I'd known through first the Do Lectures and then through his own events that he runs, Reasons to be Cheerful and others. And we were talking about Track because he'd put out a little video about how great and sustainable your bags were and how kind of locally sourced most of the materials were. And I just thought, that's really neat. And he said, You're based in Glasgow. And I was coming up, this is like 2.5 years ago now, that I was going to be in Glasgow for a couple of days on an Edinburgh trip. And I asked Mark for an intro just in case I might be able to swing by. And that was the first time I came by the factory. I think I remember you and Colin came in on the day you were closed, because I didn't know at the time that you only worked 4-day weeks, which is amazing. And you came in and you gave me a little bit of a tour of the empty workshop, which was amazing. And I was sold instantly. I mean, I still think about the conversations that we had back then about just materials and your curiosity in exploring different ways to make things. And also, I remember being so surprised at how, like, almost embarrassed that I hadn't heard about Track until that point, because I think at that point you'd already been around more than 10 years. And so for me, it was a discovery, but it was also a discovery that immediately felt like well past its time. So you won me over immediately. You were very kind. I bought a couple of things immediately, but you refused to let me buy a bag and instead let me leave with one of the new bags at the time. I think it was about to be released. And I mentioned a little bit of this in my interview for the customer stories, but it was such a great way to kind of be introduced to a brand that makes good things, that has amazing people behind it, and there was just nothing but positivity behind it. And for me, like, one of my goals in my, like, the current stage of my career. I call it later stage because I only have a couple of decades left if I'm lucky, I think. And I'm on the 50 side of my mid 40s, and so it becomes more and more important to me to work with people who I like and who are doing good things, regardless of their scale. And it just got me thinking about how all the things I do could overlap possibly with all the things that Track does. And when we met again a year later, which is now like 18 months ago or so, we started talking about this idea of interviewing and meeting customers and telling the stories of customers, which is something that I've been trying to get customers that I've worked with, clients of mine, in especially in brand and on the photography side, to do as much as possible. Not everyone gets it, but I firmly believe that telling the stories of the people who love a thing is a much stronger way to connect with an audience and with your fans or potential new customers than trying to tell the story of a product over and over and over again, which works to a point.
I remember you telling us, telling us that when you came to visit, and that really resonating with me because I think, for us, we really try and place the customers right at the center of the brand. And there are so many interesting customers out there. We just wanted to know everything about them. And when you came in saying that you were trying to encourage brands to do that more, something just clicked, didn't it? And
Yeah.
I think the customer stories project really came from that.
Yeah, and there was just an instant understanding from you of what I was trying to say and what and why it would be so important. But also, I think you understand your customers so well that you knew that there was just this wonderful collection of people and stories to pull from, and that all we had to do was kind of figure out who those initial people would be, which wasn't straightforward and easy because you have so many amazing fans of the brand.
Yeah, so I mean, when we had the idea, I think our first port of call was to sort of put a call out on social media and see if anyone would be interested in having a chat with us. And we sort of asked people to submit, a bit of information about themselves, and we were overwhelmed really by the amount of people who were interested. And then we realised that these people were all over the world. And it became very clear that it was going to become a logistical nightmare. So, so I guess what we had to do really is whittle that list down. And obviously, we knew that you were going to be here in the UK for a period of time. And so I guess we created a bit of a road trip for you, didn't we, around the UK?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, because it literally we covered customers from Glasgow and Edinburgh all the way down to Brighton. So it definitely did span the entire length of the UK. And we managed in the end, the list of initial customers that we curated were in a kind of a narrow vertical list. We did have a couple of folks in West Wales that just didn't end up getting scheduled because of timing. But so it's the length of the UK, not the breadth. But it wasn't for lack of people, right? As you said, you've got customers all over the world and people who are so eager to share their stories. And for me, as just a broadly speaking, a storyteller, someone who's always looking for stories, just seeing those responses, seeing how eager people were, was encouraging. But I kind of knew it would happen. But even if you know it's going to happen, you have like 99% confidence in it. You still need that little 1%. It actually matters a whole lot more than 1% to see those people come back. And yeah, as an origin story, I think that works really well because it wouldn't have happened without Mark Shaler, and that kind of ties in well to how the interviews got started, which was with Mark. He was the first person I spoke to, and that kind of, for me, that dovetailed the whole story of how I came to meet you and get introduced to Trakke.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark is a bad influence, and oddly, I've known him for a long time, and realized after a few years that he actually lives about 5 minutes from my family home. So it's a small world how these things end up. But
Amazing.
But yeah, so we had found all of these customers. We'd built a sort of road trip for you. And as you know, Dan, I'm obviously a massive carry nerd. So I guess I should really ask, what did you take with you? I know you've got a Hoy backpack. What kind of kit were you carrying to do all of these interviews?
Well, I did take my Hoy everywhere. I also have a number. I've got dozens of camera bags, backpacks, or shoulder bags. I'm a bag nerd, but we've talked about this. I test bags because I'm always trying to find the right one for various purposes. But so I have quite a boring big camera bag that I took with me to house all the gear itself. But as I've told you before, I still use my Hoy as a bit of a camera bag because in an interesting way, because it doesn't have any padding for gear. It makes me very choosy about what I put in because I'm kind of padding it in an ad hoc kind of way where I'm taking a small, like, satchel shoulder bag that is meant for camera equipment and just stuffing it inside the
Yeah.
Hoy.
If you take a big bag, you're always going to find a way to fill it. If you take a
Oh,
small bag,
always.
you're more likely to travel light.
Always, and it ends up working really well for that, especially when I'm on hikes or something where I will take the Hoy and I just won't overload myself with gear, which otherwise I guarantee you I would and have. So yeah, no, it came with me everywhere, and I mean I mentioned this in the interview, but so when people read that they'll be able to see this, but um, I literally have taken that Hoy everywhere with me in 2.5 years because I'll pack it down empty into my suitcase and then use it as my day bag when I get to another destination. If I have a big camera backpack that I'm lugging with me for gear, for instance, and it's proven to be a very reliable companion everywhere. So yeah, it did come along on the trip. I used a combination of 3 different cameras on the project. I always have backups. I shot the whole thing on film, which is something we can talk about if you'd like. And whenever I'm shooting with these older cameras, even if they're on the newer side, which means made in the 2000s, it's still nice to make sure that you have backups and you have coverage just in case something breaks down when you're on the road. So it still wasn't a big load out of kit. Lots of rolls of film. No lighting or anything, all using natural light. So my goal was to be as light as possible while doing this road trip, while visiting all these people, and to not be kind of an imposition on either their personal workspace or their home. Or really, I wanted to make sure that I was traveling light enough that if the customer wanted to go out for a wander and go just walking through a city or go for a hike, that I would be able to do that and I wouldn't be locked down to having some tripods and light
Sure.
stands and everything else.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I guess we should ask what camera were you using to shoot all of this stuff?
Well, the camera that I used. So I lied. There were 3 film cameras and 1 digital camera. The digital camera was a Leica SL2S, one of their newer digital bodies, and that was used for the kind of motion portraits. Which, if everyone's looking at carefully at the stories that are posted or the reels that are posted, you'll see these kind of very slow motion, straight on shots of each customer, and they're also on the main customer stories page that has the index of all the interviews. And the idea of this was to get some video in a project that was otherwise going to be shot on film in a very analog way. And so it's a wonderful camera system, even though it was just used for this really narrow selection of work in this project.
But I love those shots. I love how those shots turned out, where you sort of barely realize that it's actually film. It sort of it looks like a photograph, and then suddenly someone blinks, And I think that sort of super slow mo is a really effective, lovely way to sort of get a bit of personality across.
Yeah, it's got a dreamlike quality to it as well, and it's worked well, especially the way it's been cut into the reels and the stories and used on the site. So I love getting to see that. For the film cameras, some of the hero shots, like the bigger images of the customer and their bags, those were all shot on medium format using a Pentax 645N for those camera geeks out there who want to look that up. And everything else was shot on a pair of really late model Nikon 35mm autofocus cameras, which I don't talk about using a ton because I don't use them a lot. But in this kind of situation where I don't want to be messing around with manual focus or settings and I just want to get the image and just be working very fluidly, they're perfect. And they're basically like using a modern Nikon DSLR, except they shoot on film and they can shoot very fast frame rates. You can go through a whole roll of film in about 10 seconds if you wanted to. But they're great for capturing moments that you would miss otherwise. And yeah, as I said, I had a Nikon F5 and a Nikon F100 as the backup, and just interchanged between them on the project.
And tell me, like, you obviously had an idea of what questions you were going to ask, because I didn't really want to lead you too much in the questions to ask. I was sort of conscious that if people were talking perhaps directly to me, they might say different things than speaking to sort of a third party who, sort of independent. Um, so I think I sort of left you to your own devices to hatch the questions. What kind of questions did you ask people, and why?
Well, I think we talked about this ahead of time about making sure that people were as open as possible. So even though it was an official project for the brand, that they realized that they weren't being grilled, and they didn't have to feel like they needed to be careful about what they said. And I actually just let people know that before we even started like recording the interview. So everyone was really comfortable. I also, even separate from the questions themselves, it was very important to me that all of the interviews themselves were recorded with people after I'd spent a day with them, and we were just chatting and getting to know each other while I was taking the photos, so that by the time we got to the recording, they were already really comfortable with me. And then the questions themselves were kind of formulaic, so that each of the interviews gave us the same opportunity to get similar stories or similar elements from people, even if it's just the basics. So, I mean, I asked very basic questions: who they are, what they do for a living, to kind of get a baseline, but also things that are a little bit more individual in the answers, like things like, what keeps you passionate and motivated, because for everyone that's going to be something different. Although what was really great is that when we get all of the interviews kind of together, you see that the type of person is very similar, even if their line of work is completely different. There were a lot of similarities in what got people out of bed every day and what was really important to people and their priorities. And I think that makes sense that those people are also all Trakke customers, because a lot of the answers of how they found their way to Trakke, how they first discovered it, that was one of my questions. And what's important to them in not about the bag or bags that they own that are from Trakke, but just things that are with them every day, right? Like that was something that I thought would give us some really interesting answers that weren't specific to Trakke's products, because otherwise it might seem too brandy, but that would inherently tell us a lot about why that person chose a Trakke product, because it fit into these things that were just important to them.
So what sort of similarities did you find then, Dan, when you were asking them that kind of question?
A lot of people were really, really keen on finding bags that were locally made and sustainably sourced and produced. Again, this is kind of a personality type answer, but again, all of the people who are drawn to a brand for similar reasons, not just to their products, but to the ethos of the brand. And what you have created with Trakke tells a very consistent story, and it is very much about how you've built the company, where it is based, how you hire the team, what's important to you and what's important to the team members. And it always feels very personal. And everyone was attracted to that in some way, whether it was the materials, whether it was the fact that it was locally made in Glasgow, which mattered to people in Brighton just as much as it mattered to people in Edinburgh and Glasgow, right? That they knew where it was from and who made it.
I think I'm really heartened to hear that that's how sort of people view it, because, I guess when I started Trakke back in 2010, we were trying to make a British-made product here in the UK. That wasn't especially common at the time. And I thought, hey, there's got to be loads of people in the UK who want to buy something that's made here, and uses materials that are made here. And then ironically, as we've grown, nowadays we seem to export more of our products overseas. So it seems that, yes, there are people in the UK who love that, but actually there's a lot more people overseas who maybe resonate with that more. So it's sort of an interesting dynamic, and I'm quite glad to hear that there's a crew in the UK that appreciate it, because it's certainly a tough journey.
I think people like knowing where something is made and who made it, and ultimately, to a lot of people who find that important, it doesn't matter where it's made, as long as they know who has made it and how it's made. that there is some kind of meaning and purpose behind it even, and that meaning and purpose can just be making it sustainable, making it local, making it good. But that's very different than how some things end up at a certain scale, or if a company is started with a different goal in mind. The other thing that stood out to me that was really consistent across all the customers was, and some of this came across in their interviews. Some of it just happened to be things that were discussed while I was hanging out with them, taking their photos. But the number of times people mentioned the repair policy, and some folks had their bags repaired already, so they knew it firsthand. Some people, it weighed into their purchase because they knew that by buying a bag that had free repairs for life, it means that they were buying multiple bags. Really, in their heads, that's how they were able to justify it. They said, "I'm not just buying one bag. I'm buying the ability to not have to buy another bag again." And so it's funny, those things. There were lots of other things that were just, again, in essence, were similar between all of the customers, but those two items came up over and over and over again. The idea of this, the story behind the brand, the sustainability of and sourcing of the materials, and the fact that the company stands behind the bags. And those things should be pretty basic, but in the world we live in now, those aren't qualities that come with every product that you buy. And I think, again, to a discerning customer, that makes a big difference.
I think that's really interesting because, and it brings us actually back to Mark Shaler, of all people, because Mark, as you know, is an environmental consultant. And I remember meeting Mark a long, long time ago and talking to him about sort of sustainability with relation to product. And, he said this really interesting thing that really resonated with me, where we were talking about Arga stoves, those big sort of cast iron stoves. I mean, these things guzzle fuel. They're on all the time. They seem like an absolute environmental disaster. But he was saying, yes, on the one hand, they are an environmental disaster, but on the other hand, they last for like 1,000 years. They just cannot break. And so actually, and also, like, a lot of, with product, a lot of the real environmental cost of a product happens at the manufacturing stage. So to make a product once that can last for 10, 20, 30 years, regardless of the actual sort of or not regardless, but, even not considering the carbon emissions of the materials, etc. But if you can make that product last for a long time, you can spread that energy and those emissions over a much longer period of time. And really, that is the world we need to live in. We need to be looking after the things that we buy. We need to fall in love with the things that we buy. We need to, care for those things, and try and make sure that they last for as long as possible. And obviously that, to some degree, is something that customers at home can do. But really, it's a responsibility that myself and other people who are running product businesses need to take on. You need to make people fall in love with a product, because if they fall in love with it, they're going to look after it. And if they look after it, they're going to keep it for a long, long time to come. Yeah.
And again, it's unfortunate that doesn't matter to everybody, because it really should. But that was a 100% commonality between everyone I interviewed for the project, was that it mattered to every one of them. And that's how, one way or another, that's how they found their way to Trakke and how they fell in love with it.
Amazing. Now, Dan, actually, as a man who spends most of his time behind the lens, we actually asked you to get shoved in front of the lens for this project. We thought, what better way to introduce you than to do your very own customer story? Now, I don't know if you've got very long arms or if you've got a friend to help with that, but tell us a bit about how it felt to be in front of the lens for a change.
Well, I'm lucky that I've spent most of my life either on stage or, well, very little of it in front of the camera, but I've been a performer my entire life as a musician. So at least, even if I'm uncomfortable with the idea of something, I'm comfortable enough with it that I can push through. And I was happy to help. It made sense to be one of the stories, to participate in that way, because I am a fan of Track in that way, and I am a customer. So I was lucky enough to have a really good friend, Jahan Saber in Vienna, take a series of photos using the exact same method and the same film that I had used for the rest of the project, and it was during a trip to Vienna, so the timing just worked out really brilliantly. And Jahan is a great photographer, so I'm very thankful to have people like that around me that can help out in instances like this. The interview itself was very odd because I interviewed myself, and that's the first time I've ever done that, and maybe it'll be the last time, because it's very strange to kind of be sitting there at one microphone, asking the questions that I asked to every other customer on the project, and then answering them myself, but not being able to interrupt myself when I kept going on and on and on about something. So it's not really a surprise, and it won't be a surprise to anyone who knows me, that my interview was about twice as long as any of the other customers. But all of that aside, it was a wonderful opportunity to kind of literally turn the lens on myself, but also kind of turn those questions on myself and see how I answered them, because I was really surprised at some of the things that I said, because I hadn't really thought about how I would answer those questions. And just like all of the customers that I got to speak with for the project, there were some fantastic stories that came out of those questions, and a lot of meaning and a lot of wonderful tangents as well.
I mean, I'm so glad that it all worked out, Dan, because I think there was a moment sort of in the middle of the project when, there was a pretty good likelihood that it wasn't going to work out. So something happened. Tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Well, so as sometimes happens in life, and even Mother Nature has other plans. And while the project was kind of just about to get into the post-production stage and all of the edits from all these interviews, a freak storm sat over my hometown of Fort Lauderdale in Florida, and it caused a flood, basically a freak flood that they call a 1,000-year flood. And one of the houses that was affected was my childhood home, and it was completely flooded to the point where she had to be evacuated by a family friend. My brother wasn't able to reach her. He lives about 15 minutes away normally, and I was up in North Scotland, north of Aberdeen at the time, and so only found out the next day, and dropped absolutely everything, flew back to the States, and we proceeded to spend the next kind of 3 or 4 months just sifting through all 45, 50 years worth of family possessions, and figuring out what could be saved, what couldn't be, moving things out of the house into storage, just a whole process when everything has been, essentially destroyed or damaged. And this, I mean, it put pause to the customer stories project and absolutely every other project that I was working on at the time. And it was really an unknown quantity at the time to how long it would take before any degree of normality
Yeah.
would come back to things. But very, very thankfully, even though the repairs and things are still ongoing as we speak, 10 months later, my mom is okay. We were able to rescue a lot of materials, and
Right.
it could have been worse, right?
Yeah, I think you have an incredibly optimistic view on it, Dan, and I'm so glad that, although obviously it must have been a really traumatic experience, I'm so glad that you managed to sort of salvage whatever you could, um, and and that you looped back around and ended up bringing customer stories into the world for us, because you must have had a lot on your plate.
Well, and it's a testament to you and the rest of the track team and everyone else that I was working with at the time. That everyone was just so supportive that after being through such a traumatic experience, and it still is, the trauma is still ongoing, and it's tough to kind of remember that some days, that it's still very much a thing that is happening rather than has happened. And yet things are getting back on track, on schedule, and this project, I think, uh, is the most important for me in that way, because it was a project that from the start was very personal to me, as well as personal to you and the company. And to see it actually coming out, and to have basically, because I did the bulk of the work before all of that happened. So for me, it's kind of this project where one half of it is before the flood, and then the other half of it is after. And it's hard to state how emotional it is to actually see it out in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's come together so nicely. I mean, we've already got 2 or 3 stories up online. We've got 12 stories in total that you made for us. And this is something that we really want to continue as well. I mean, like as we found out when we sort of did a call out, there are people all over the world, and unfortunately, it's really tricky to get one photographer to all of those places in a short space of time. So,
Hmm.
I think what you've done here is create this incredible template that we can use um, to reach out to more people and just learn more about our customers, because wow, there are some amazing stories in there. Um, and some people who've just done incredible things in their life, and I think that's so inspiring.
Well, and
um,
that was really my hope with the project in the first place, and what I'm very thankful to you for is understanding that and believing in it from the beginning, that this would be a starting point, that if you believed in your customers enough, you would understand that it's a gold mine. That your list of customers is a gold mine. They are a gold mine of just genuine, honest stories, full of emotion and sometimes full of action and intrigue and drama, and heartbreak and trauma and all. I mean, just in the stories for this first part of the project, we have all of that, and getting to meet all of these people was just such a great project for me. My biggest joy in life, regardless of how it happens, is meeting people and finding out their stories. It's why I've moved into things that are more documentary in style, and that's where I'm going with my filmmaking as well, because I like learning about people. And if you can connect that with a product or a series of products that are also telling a great story in their own way, I think you hit a sweet spot for what is normally kind of this really strange, weird world of branding and advertising and marketing and promotion that ultimately we all have to feed into in some way. And so I feel like this is one of the most genuine ways that we can do that. And so just a big personal, heartfelt thank you to you for understanding and believing in it and getting behind it, because the results are fantastic. And I think they provide a template, not just for Trakke and what you can do around the world from here on out with your customers, but also for loads of other brands who maybe hadn't have thought of it or couldn't visualize it.
I think what's so amazing about this project is that it's fascinating. Personally, it's fascinating to find out our customer stories, but it's also, we've learned things from this project that we can use to inform design decisions, and the things that some of these customers were saying, hopefully can help other customers as well to inform their purchases. We don't want to bullshit people, and what we say only goes so far. We're going to be biased, and I think what's lovely about this project is that you're hearing sort of genuine stories about people who use our bags from those people, from their own perspective, and thanks to you, through a sort of relatively unfiltered viewpoint. And I think it's been fantastic for us, and certainly a huge sort of valuable treasure trove of information and insight that we can build on.
You mentioned learning things that will improve future products. For me, that was, as a product designer, that was one of the surprise aspects of doing this, is that from the first interview, I realized that there would be information about how people use their bags that they wouldn't necessarily talk about otherwise, because they were having a casual conversation. I've done a lot of usability research in my career, and one of the challenges is to get people to be honest, is to get people to just be open and not feel like they have to say the right thing, to feel like they can not criticize per se, but make suggestions and say, oh, this is fantastic, but it would be even better if. And when you get that in a way that's not direct, where it's not coming at the brand, that it is, as you said, a little bit more unfiltered, and and a little bit more honest, and there's no negativity behind it at all. It's people being genuinely so in love with the thing that they start to daydream about what it could be. And yeah, it turned into this mini research project, as you know, and you've got all of these recordings that give you actual firsthand information of how people use them, how they've had them repaired, what they feel works, what they feel doesn't. And I mean, I have to say, there's not a long list for people of things that didn't work. It's more about how people end up using them for me that was really fascinating. The way the hacks people came up with, or
Yeah.
the uses that people had, or the way that they would double up on
Yeah.
bags that I would never imagine.
We see
You
a
do
lot of that,
that.
and people
Yeah.
always come up with wild ideas, and it's always so great to see. I mean, I feel like if you're passionate enough to modify your bag, then you really are, engaging and doing interesting things that we can learn from, um, which is amazing. I mean, I think actually, Dan, my big takeaway from this whole project is, we called it customer stories, and customer stories is really what it has been since day one. But I just can't help but feel like sort of customer feels like quite formal. I think a lot of these people having, I've met some of them. I've certainly read the stories through you, and as you know, we have quite good relationships with a lot of our customers. And I feel like customer feels a bit formal. I think
Yeah.
we need another name for them. I don't know if you've got any suggestions, Dan.
Oh, the only suggestions that ever come off the top of my head are corny, because the first thing that pops in my mind is like a Trakke, because I'm a Star Trek fan, right?
Oh, right. Okay.
But
Like a Trekkie.
but really, like it is there. When I talk to friends and coworkers about the project, I always use the word fans,
Yeah.
because that's really how they all came across to me. They weren't customers. They had a bag, they bought one or been given one or something like that, um, but they were all fans. They loved whatever they owned, and that's not something that you hear all the time. That's not an emotion that comes across when people are talking about a thing, an object, an everyday carry. And so whatever, I really think you're right. These aren't calling these people customers is underselling how much emotion there is from them to what you have made.
And also maybe underselling how, I think also underselling how we feel about them. I think,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm stuck with you, Dan. I'm afraid I always go to the cheesy place too. I was thinking tracker lights, but it maybe feels a little bit cultish.
Well, but you know what? Sometimes that's not a bad thing, if it's something that people can get behind. And I think everyone, if you do it with enough of a sense of humor, right, rather than, that's one of the other problems you see with so many brands when they try to create community, is that they take themselves too seriously and they're trying too hard. And really, when you have a community already, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
You just have
Well,
to continue to be yourself.
yeah. I mean, if you like dad jokes, I've got loads of them. More than happy to help.
Love it.
So finally, Dan, were there any moments from your time with our customers that really stood out to you?
Well, every one of them was an amazing person. I had the absolute best time getting to meet each of them. It really felt like meeting a new friend each time. And some of the customers were friends already, Mark, and then my friend Ashley in Glasgow. But the rest I'd never met before, and it felt like I was quickly becoming friends with someone new each time. So that in itself stood out, and also just the vast, like, variety of places that I got to go and spend time, whether it was on an archery range just after dawn, or in a church in Edinburgh, or hiking through the wilderness of Scotland, or even just exploring Brighton and the coast. The range of locations and settings was just indicative to me of how broad the customer base is, and the usage of your bags. They really are everyday carries for people, and that means that where they show up is kind of everywhere. And it made it a lot of fun for me, because I just got to explore the UK and some parts of the UK that I'd never been before, just through meeting people where they were.
I mean, I think that's a lovely sentiment to end on, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for putting all of those hours in, traveling up and down the country, meeting all of these people, making new friends, and delivering a really beautiful project that I think all of us are really, really proud to be putting out there. Please do check out all of our customer stories on our website, on our Instagram. We really want to continue this project moving forward. We want to meet more of you. We want to hear more of your stories. And I've just blanked, but here we go.
I hate it when that happens.
If you would like to get involved, do head to our website or the link in the bio, and you can enter some details, answer some questions, and submit yourself as a subject for the next Customer Stories series. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks for watching. Please do like, subscribe, follow, and check out all of the customer stories in the link in the bio. There we go. We'll call it.
Yeah, that works.
Done. Yeah.